Hi, this is Holly of Holly's Soapmaking. In this video, I'll be showing you how I make a lavender soap with a swirl using Alkanet Infused Oil. For my infusion, I added 4 teaspoons of the alkanet root powder to an 8-ounce mason jar, then filled the jar with about 5 ounces or 140 grams of olive oil. Once the alkanet is stirred into the oil, I use the hot water method to create the infusion. I'll list some of my videos below in case you need more information on creating oil infusions, along with links to other methods that don't involve heat but do take a bit longer. You'll find all the links and details for this video listed below, and if you're interested in the recipe I used, you'll find it listed at the end in a soap calculator. My original recipe contains silk, so I'll include that step too, along with how I stamped and packaged them back when I used to sell soap. Cold process soap making involves the use of sodium hydroxide or lye, which can burn your skin and damage your eyes. So be sure to always follow lye safe handling procedures during the entire soap making process, even while cleaning up. To create the lye with silk, I first measured out the distilled water. Then I took about a cotton ball sized amount of the tussa silk and cut it into small pieces into the water. I typically use this amount of tussa silk for a batch this size, which is about 2.5 pounds or 1,150 grams. In case you're wondering why I add silk, I think it gives the soap and lather an extra smooth and silky feeling that I really like. Once the silk is stirred a little to get it down into the water, I measure out the sodium hydroxide and then add it to the water and silk. When you're mixing lye, remember to work in a well-ventilated area and never stand directly over the container or breathe any of the fumes. I continued to stir the lye for a minute or so until all of the sodium hydroxide was incorporated completely and the silk had mostly dissolved. Then I set it aside to cool down and moved on to preparing the oils. I started with the cocoa butter first since it has a higher melting temperature. Once it was mostly melted, I weighed out the shea butter and coconut oil. For the liquid oils, I used olive, avocado, and castor. Once the hard oils were melted, I combined them all and then set them aside to cool down. My essential oil blend included Bulgarian lavender, lavandin, and a little bit of patchouli. I also added some white kale and clay here. Adding it to the essential oils just makes it easier to incorporate later, but you could also just add it dry to the oils or even hydrate it with a little distilled water. Similar to the reason I add silk, I really like how smooth my soaps feel when I use kale and clay. I left my oils and lye to cool down for several hours. When I came back later, they were both at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. I wanted to mention that I don't ever really worry about my oils and lye being all that close in temperature, and it was just a coincidence here that they both ended up the same. I generally aim for somewhere between room temperature and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and it mostly just depends on when I get back to the shop to actually make the soap. You can probably see here that the silk left behind a few bits and pieces. I don't really worry about them, but you can always strain the lye into the oils if you'd like. blended the soap to a light medium trace and then began the pour. I first saw this method back in 2014 in a video by Lynn of Lather and Luster, where she used Mica oil lines to create her swirls. So I tried her method, but with Alkanet Infused Oil instead, and I really liked the effect. I oven processed the soap so it would go through a complete gel phase. I removed it from the oven the next morning and then cut and unmolded it that afternoon. The Alkanet swirl lines are always a bit reddish purple when I first cut the soap, and then slowly change to a dark purple color after the soap sits for a day or so, and I've never had any trouble with the color fading. I also thought I'd show you how I used to stamp and label my soaps. If I'm going to use a stamp, I generally do that as soon as the soaps are cut, while they're still soft enough so I don't have to smack the stamp too hard, and it just requires kind of a gentle tap to get it to go down into the soap. When I first decided on my original line of soaps years ago, my mother painted scenes and images for all of my labels. I incorporated her paintings into my designs and had the labels printed on cardstock. To get the opening in the middle of each label, I just used a large punch I found at the craft store. Since this was a cold process soap, I left the top of lye set to sodium hydroxide or NaOH. My recipe oil weight was 1,150 grams. My lye concentration was set to 33%, which means my lye solution consisted of 33% sodium hydroxide and 67% water. I set the superfat to 6% and my fragrance usage rate was 50 grams per kilogram, or 5%. Once you have everything entered, you just select to calculate the recipe, then to view or print it. SoapCalc will give you a really nice listing of all of your ingredients, including the amount of sodium hydroxide required to saponify your oils. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, and I hope you found something useful here to help you in your soap making.